How much to spend on e-commerce advertising or marketing? It's a really common question that I get asked all the time, and let's find out what you should be spending. In this video, we're going to cover a couple of things. So first of all, why you can't trust Google and Meta results and what they report. Something that you can use to measure instead of Google and Meta ad reports. What is MER and how it can help you. What is the right amount to be spending? And then finally, how do we measure it? So let's get into it. Some e-commerce brands spend a huge amount of money on advertising. So I have seen plenty of accounts in my nearly 20 years of doing e-commerce spending anywhere from 30 to 60% of their revenue on ads. Just going to pause for dramatic effect. 30 to 60%. They've still got to pay for the product and everybody's salaries and rent and all those bits and pieces. Now, the reason for this is that it's very often that you log into Google Ads and it says, turn it up, you've got to do X, Y, or Z, or the same with Meta, that turn it up, otherwise your ad set won't be active, or you might be working with a freelancer or an agency. It says, turn it up, turn it up, turn it up. So people end up turning it up, and to be honest, they end up going broke. And that's not a good thing. Nobody wants that. We want everybody to be in business and be profitable in business. So really common, you've probably suffered from it. It's very easy to do. It's a very, very slippery slope. So let's look at why we can't trust Google and Meta reports. Essentially, they are guesses. So they call it attribution. You might have heard this bantered around sort of a little bit, and people talk about 1-day windows, 7-day windows, and and they end up talking, and you end up getting a headache. To be honest, they've probably got a headache, and it just doesn't make sense. So attribution is just a guess. It's a mathematical guess, basically. And we know this because if you go into Meta, and we see the results here, so this is from an account that we work on, so we've got lots of lovely sales, that's great. And this little 2 here, if you click on that 2, it basically says in the fine print that it's a statistical guess. So they don't know what has generated those sales. So therefore it's very difficult to then take for granted what they're saying and listen to them. Google's reporting is a little bit better than Meta's, but it's still a guess, because essentially what we're looking for is what has influenced that purchase, not just because they've clicked an ad or what have you. What's the main sort of like influence? So that's one of the main reasons that we then can't trust it, which puts us a bit of a predicament. What can we do? Because if it's saying keep turning it up, and we don't have the money to turn it up, and it's not profitable for to turn it up, like what is the limit? How much should we be spending? What's the balance? Obviously, we need to spend something, but we don't want to spend too much. Like where is that limit? And the fact that you're watching this video, you're still watching this video, would suggest that you've probably had this problem, or you're very keen on the subject. Let me introduce you to something called marketing efficiency ratio. So it's often shortened to MER. I live here in Australia. We love a good acronym. I'm personally not a fan of it, but hey, there we go. MER is a percentage, MER is a way of measuring how much you're spending on advertising and a way to then manage it. That comes from essentially how much you're spending and how much money is then coming in. So money in and money out. So what it is a percentage of your net revenue. So I say net revenue because we take off any taxes like GST here in Australia, or VAT in the UK, or sales tax in some states in the US. And then we work out the percent. Then we work out what we have then spent on marketing. Okay, so as a percentage. So if let's say you spent $100,000, you've had $100,000 in revenue come in, and you spent $10,000, that's a MER of 10%. Now, the lower the number and the higher the sales, the better. That basically means you're spending less and you're getting more in. However, on the other side, the higher the number your MER is and the lower your sales are is bad. So let's say if you've done $100,000 in sales, but you spent $40,000 in advertising. I appreciate they're probably quite big numbers, so we could bring them down. Let's say you've done $10,000 in sales in a month, but you spent $4,000 on advertising or pounds. That's a 40%, that's bad. High MER, bad. So, what is a good MER? Where do we want to be sort of like aiming at? Well, to understand that, we need to understand another concept. So at Boom Ecommerce, where I work or set up, ran, founder, whatever, day job, we use something called the 50-30-20 ratio. So the 50-30-20 ratio, what this is a split of all the money that comes into the business and where it goes. So the 50% is on your gross margin. That essentially is anything to do with the cost of selling the product that goes up or down. So your cost of goods, if you're shipping it, if you're paying for the shipping to customers, any fees that you're charged, etc., and stuff like that. The 30% are your operating expenses, so that pays for your rent, your salaries, your salary, or what have you. And it also covers your marketing as well, so the advertising side of things. And then 20% we're aiming at is for our net profit. It's not always there, to be honest. Sometimes the gross margin could be less, the operating expenses can be more, etc. But essentially, the MER has to fit in that operating expenses 30%. So that's where it's going to sit. So ideally, we want it less than 30%, because if you're spending all your expenses on advertising, how are you paying for everything else? How are you paying for computers? How are you paying for salaries? How are you paying for rent? Anything like that. You also probably want it higher than 10%. So you don't want to be spending too little, because then you're essentially missing out on some opportunities. So if it's too low, you're essentially missing out. Bad times, you want to be turning up. And if it's too high, you're then you're not profitable, or there's a lot less profit. So there's a balance between them. So I know you're probably looking for an exact figure of what people spend, but really we're looking for sort of like a range, and it's different for each business. So if you're growing and you're growing quite fast, you want to be spending more. But if you're wanting to be more profitable because you've got to a certain size, then you want to be spending less. But you need to stay within those bands. What I will say is that I never really want anybody over a 20% MER. Probably more somewhere like 10%, 10 or 15% is probably the sweet spot. It's individual for your individual business, basically. So let's get on to how you're going to measure it. So what you need to do is just take your net revenue for the last either 7 or 30 days. So essentially just a biggish period of time. You don't want to just do one day. Make sure it's the net revenue, so take off your GST or VAT or what have you. And then you just need to divide it by how much you spent on marketing in the last 7 or 30 days. Obviously, it's got to match the revenue days. Don't include any people costs, because they tend to be fixed rather than sort of like going up or down. The most important thing is that you're tracking it of where it's going up and down. What you then need to do is set your own goal. Set what you then want it to be so that you can be profitable. So think back to that 50-30-20 ratio. If you're still not quite around that, go back into the video and then watch that section again. As I say, anywhere from like 10 to 20 is probably the sweet spot for you. Higher if you're smaller and trying to grow. It will blow out from 20% for the first couple of weeks or months, but you then want to build it up. So high for growth, lower for profit. Then what you do is track it weekly in a spreadsheet. You don't need any fancy tools or anything like that. Literally just punch in that number. This is how much money we made. This is how much we spent on advertising. Is it too high? Is it too low? If it's too high, you then need to turn it down or improve the advertising and targeting. If it's too low, you then need to turn it up. That is how to work out how much to spend on advertising. If you found this video useful, subscribe. There's more videos coming where we talk about how to manage e-commerce businesses profitably.